morning.
Hi, everybody. Oh
Hello,
my God, look at
everybody.
those gorgeous flowers.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is Mediation, the New Possibilities Hour. Today is June 9th, 2020. We are recording this. Our very special guest today is Susan Guthrie. She's here helping us in the Will Work for Food project, the series of webinars organized by Natalie Armstrong. The series is free to anybody who would like to watch. We do ask you, if you like what you see, please make a donation to a food bank. Natalie, about how much have we raised so far through the series?
We have raised almost $25,000.
Wow.
Wow.
$25,000 in the last 30 days. Our industry, it just makes me weepy and proud at how much money we've raised.
That is awesome, and it's because of all of you who are watching that we're able to announce such a wonderful, wonderful result. Thank you all very much. And Susan is going to make a wonderful presentation to us today. Susan is one of the leading divorce mediators, family law mediators, and lawyers in the country. She's coming to us from her home in Chicago, Illinois. And Susan is a true pioneer in online dispute resolution. She's been mediating online for years, whereas for most of us, we're measuring it still in a matter of weeks. So Susan has a tremendous wealth of experience and knowledge to share with us today. We're so glad she's here. What we've asked Susan to discuss specifically is how to establish rapport and chemistry with people in online communication. So we'll be touching on that, and we'll be touching on many, many other aspects of effective online mediation as well. So with that, Susan, the virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Natalie, both of you, for having me be a part of this project. I have to say, when I first saw it announced on LinkedIn, I was floored because it's such a wonderful idea. And I thank you all for coming here today. I signed up for some of the webinars as well and made my donations to some food banks in my Chicago area. So I love the idea that we can learn and give back. So thank you all for being here. And this is a topic, you know, I have to say, Natalie mentioned before we opened up the waiting room that this is a question, this how do you establish that emotional connection? How do you establish rapport that she's heard in almost all of these different presentations? And, you know, I've been doing my online mediation training now pretty regularly for the past 3 months. In fact, I think I've trained over 15,000 people. And that's because, you know, so many of us are making that just immediate crashing pivot to going online during COVID. And this is also one of the top questions I get either at the end of my webinars or when people get in touch with me after. So I'm really happy to address it. In fact, I just told Natalie, I actually had Dr. Deborah Dupree, who's a psychologist, on my podcast, the Learn to Mediate Online podcast, last week talking about this very subject. So I'll be upfront honest with all of you. I'm stealing some of this from her because these were concepts that were in my mind and I was actually doing them, but didn't realize them, didn't say them as well as she did. So I'm going to share some of what she had to say, as well as what I have found in the past 5 or 6 years that I've been mediating online, because that emotional connection is really, I think, for all of us, so much at the core of what we do. And in many ways, it's unconscious. And we tune into the people. Now, the very first thing I want to say is have some trust in yourselves as mediators, because that is something else that I have experienced over the 5 years, is that you pick up those signals. You have your ways of connecting with people that you had in person, and the shift to online does not necessarily mean those things go away. I think because this change has come upon all of us so quickly, and because the technology can feel so different and new to us, in some ways we think, well, then this must be vastly different. And in many ways, I've not found that to be the truth. And I will say that is anecdotally what I also hear from so many of the people who have taken my trainings. But there are things that we can do to enhance that connection. And it starts with pre-mediation. Much of the work in establishing that emotional connection is actually what we do before the mediation ever starts. And some of it is practical, and some of it is starting the connection. So I'm going to start with that practical. And it goes to how you actually are set up for your mediations and how your participants are set up for the mediation. So this is something that we actually need to address well in advance of getting started, because this might take some time for people. And it goes right to the equipment, the lighting, the camera, the microphone that we have, because as human beings, much of our communication is actually visual. 55% is the expression on people's face, and another about 25% is actually the inflection in our voices. The remainder is the words that we say, 20%. It's the smallest part of our communication. So as part of having that emotional connection, the very first thing I would say is we need to be able to see people clearly, hear them clearly, and they need the same. So we need to tell them that they need to have a good camera and that it needs to be set up so that we can see their face. How many of you have jumped on a meeting in the past, several days where you are looking up someone's nose? I mean, I have looked up more noses than I care to count in the past couple of months, or the top of someone's forehead because they have the camera set up like this. We need that focus on the face. People need to know that they have to have a good camera where we can see it. And we want people to be visual. This is something that I find resistance to for many people. My hair's a mess. I just got up. I haven't put on, my makeup. I don't want to be on screen. Highly encourage people to participate visually. I always point out to them, because so much of communication is the visual in our facial expressions, that by going dark, they actually are inhibiting their communication. They are actually putting themselves at a disadvantage. So I let my participants know that from the get-go. Obviously, if they choose to call in and only be a disembodied voice coming through the screen or coming through a phone, that is their choice, but they should know that they are perhaps disadvantaging themselves. The other point of viewing people is you also need to be able to hear them. So I have this fancy mic set up, not because I do online mediations, that's actually for the podcasts, but having a good mic setup is actually very important. You see Jeff has I call it the Madonna headset, right? And that dates me because she used to run around on the stage with that ball coming, running around. But we have to get over the fear of either having something on our heads or having something in front of us, because placement of your microphone, having good, clear audio is another part of that communication aspect. The inflection in voice is very important. We get a lot of clues. You can have someone say fine or fine, or, fine can be said in a number of ways. The tone and the inflection in the voice from that one word is vitally important. So we also need to make sure that not only we, the mediator, but most importantly, our participants have a good microphone or have a good setup. Many people don't pay any attention to that until the day of the mediation, and then they don't have good audio. One little tip is very often they can have better audio by calling into, if you're using Zoom, calling into the phone number than if they're using the audio on their computer. Keep in mind, having the microphone right in front of you is the best way to get good audio, but we push our computer away from us when we're doing a mediation so that we can have our desk free. The further you move the mic from you, the lower the sound quality. So those, your setup is a great deal of making sure that there's good communication. The other note to all of that is lighting. And everyone that I see here has good lighting, I can see your faces, you have light on your face. Imagine how important that is, because if you do not have light, I get people who sign in for their divorce mediations all the time with this nice bright window behind them and no light on their face, and they look like Deep Throat during the Watergate hearings. And maybe that's comfortable for them. They don't want to be seen, but they're disadvantaged because we can't pull information from that expression, from that 55% of their communication. So that is all something, and I'm going to make available to everyone who's here. I've got to pull it up. I apologize. I meant to do it beforehand, but I have a handout that I send to clients well in advance of the mediation that explains all of this to them, all the equipment that they might consider, the setup that they might want, and the fact that their visual and audible communication is so important online. But flip that around for a minute. The other aspect of all of this is, because people are online, if they have a good setup, because we are so focused on the face, and because facial expression is so important, and because we have the ability to have good audio, we actually can have enhanced communication as opposed to a crowded room where there's a lot going on. If we are looking at someone on the screen where we are just focused on their face, my personal experience is I can pull quite a bit of communication out of the online platform that I might have missed. You don't miss the eye rolls as often in an online proceeding as you do when you're looking at the wife and the husband's over there like this, in my personal sphere of mediation. So that's one aspect of well in advance of the mediation. But the other thing that many mediators have reported back to me, and this is something that Dr. Dupree talked about as a way to start to establish that rapport, are the pre-mediation conferences. They are vitally important, no matter, I think, what type of mediation you're doing, if you want to start to establish rapport with your participants. And this can serve sort of a practical, a practical aspect of your mediations. You can check in that pre-mediation meeting conference, you can check how their setup looks, make suggestions to them about maybe getting a better camera or a better setup or a better location. But you can also start to get that input. This is no different than probably what we do anyway, but start creating that connection with the participants, start asking them what their interests are. That we lose a lot when we don't do that. Now, I know we can't force people to take advantage of that, but again, educating them on why it's so important. If you're working with advocates, point out to them how important it might be to their clients. We've got some screen sharing going on. I'm not sure if we wanted that. So I'm just going to see if, oh, there we go. So, keep that in mind, educating people ahead of time as to why the video is so important, why the pre-mediation is so important, educating your advocates on why their client might want to come and have that pre-mediation conference with you to be able to start expressing their viewpoint, their interests, their goals. It can be an incredibly impactful moment. It also means for many people that they can get the butterflies out before the mediation actually starts. And I do find that this is very helpful to people, because mediation for our participants is already, unless they're the advocates, but for the clients, it can be a scary moment. They're coming into a proceeding they know very little about, likely, and they're coming in, they're nervous. Well, if they have that pre-mediation conference with us, that moment to meet us, get to hear our voice, we can talk them through the process, they get that opportunity to sign on, see how everything works, get comfortable with the platform. Then when they sign on for the mediation, they're also much less nervous and much more able to be communicative as opposed to being afraid of the whole process. So those two aspects, both educating them about their setup as well as having a meeting with them ahead of time can be a huge step forward in creating that emotional connection. The other thing that I replicate doing, so when I was mediating in person, I would take the time to go and individually meet with the two parties. I would say hello. If it were a pro se mediation, I'd meet with one side, say hello, get them settled, come out and meet with the other side, say hello, get them settled. If I was doing caucus or if I was doing a joint. If it was with counsel, then I'd meet with the plaintiff and their counsel and then the defendant and their counsel. And I always called that the gracious hello. So I've translated that to my online practice and I advocate it for the people who take my training. There's no reason why those nice aspects of what you do in your in-person proceedings cannot be translated in some fashion to your online process. And that gracious welcome or gracious greeting, right? We would go out and see Attorney Green, who we've known for 10 years, and say, hey, Bob, how are you? How are the kids? It's great to see you. How you holding up in COVID? There's no reason not to do that in an online proceeding. You can bring in groups of people from the waiting room in batches, meet, say hello. Oh, it's nice to see you again, Ms. Green. I see you have done this since we met in our pre-mediation conference. It looks like your setup's great. How are you feeling today? Is there anything, you have any questions, anything you want to know before we get started? If you remember, I'm going to be, bringing in each group. So I'm going to get the two of you settled into that breakout room, which you remember is your private conference room. Any questions, and then move them in. But taking those few moments to just say hello, and we do it anyway, just figure out how you want to do that in your online process. It also brings that tension level down just the same way. I mean, we have people who are very nervous, who are now, it's the big day, we're doing the mediation. It gives them those few moments to reconnect with you and get started again. And then there's when we get into the actual mediation itself. And this was where I thought Dr. Deborah had a few points that were really impacted me. And it surprised me because they were things I found I had been doing, but I had not identified them as things that were helping me with rapport and with empathy. So one thing that she pointed out, many of us might in a mediation, when one of the parties is becoming emotional or having some difficulty, we might reach out and pat their hand or touch their shoulder to show our empathy in a way, but we're restrained from that in this online setting. This is where I know many mediators feel, oh, we're inhibited. We can't get that, physical connection. She said, you know what, describe that. Describe what you would do and say, if we were together, I can sense this is in a very emotional, subject for you. And if we were together, I'd reach out and touch your hand because I really feel that for you. But when she said that to me, I could almost feel her reaching out and doing that. And I realized I have been describing what I would do if we were together to my participants. And it is a calming way. It is, many people say, how do you manage their emotions as effectively when you're remote from them? Well, that is one way that you can do it. What would you have done in person? And how can you describe that to them so that they know that you're feeling their emotional content, that's coming across to them? That's a moment of connection that we can still have with them. We're going to do it a little more verbally. But the other thing is leaning in or being extremely attentive, making that eye contact. Those are all things that are also very helpful in that moment to establish that connection. If you stop and you look directly into someone's eyes and make sure that you are giving them that moment of your full attention, as opposed to looking all around the screen and checking out everything that's going on or looking down and taking your notes. There's that moment to really be able to come together with them. And it works with attorneys as well. I've found, as I'm talking to my advocates in mediations, that moment of pulling them back in, because the attorneys I find will be wandering off like squirrels. They have, you know, they've got their phone ringing, they've got their emails to answer, they're very busy. And I say that I'm one of them, but, you know, bringing them back in by, you know, well, Bill, you know, let's talk about this, and talking directly to them, looking at them. Now, one of the things online that can be difficult is if you have, you know, a screen share going on and all the little pictures have video thumbnails have gone over to the right-hand side of your screen. They're over there and your camera is over here. So one quick tip is just grab the video thumbnails and drag them over to the middle of your screen. So many people don't do that, and then they end up looking, like I'm looking at Claire right now over in the corner of the screen. Hi, Claire. And it looks like I'm not looking at whoever I'm actually talking to. So it's very easy to do. You just hold your cursor down on the thumbnails and drag them over to the center. And that will also give you that, you know, there's nothing that's more off-putting than someone looks like they're not looking at you when they're talking to you. So something I highly encourage. And so I'm always dragging those screen. I mean, I move them around all the time, because then you'll find they're right in the middle of your screen when you're trying to look at something. You just drag them, and I don't even think about it anymore. I've been doing this for so long and talking to people online so many times, I just drag them all over the place. They don't know you're doing it, so it's not a problem for them. But I really loved what Dr. Deborah said about describing in person what you would do with people, or being very descriptive in ways that we might not have been as descriptive in person, by just saying, I can see this makes you very emotional, or I can see that this is something that is of great importance to you and it brings up, you know, something deep inside, and explore that with them. She said there's actually ways that you can use that to build, you know, if it's that important, that's a big, you know, we know this, but that's a big signal to us that this is of great importance to this person. And we can still be doing that throughout this entire process. I truly feel that because we can be so focused on their face, as I said before, and on their voice, and be looking directly at them in that moment that we're talking with them, we can actually have an enhanced connection. And then, you know, a couple of other things to be aware of, because this is something that I have found in the 5 years I've been online, and it took me a little while to be aware of it, because I would say it is unconscious bias. And this is something that I think we all need to be aware of. So when people are participating online, the technology issues can bring about situations that might unconsciously bring about some bias. Situations where people do not know how to use the technology, people who are not set up well, so we are looking at them all just from the top of their head, or up their nose, or whatever that might be. The person who didn't take the time to figure out the technology ahead of time, so you spend the first 15 minutes of the mediation with all the other participants patiently waiting, or not so patiently waiting, as you explain to that person how to use the share screen or something of that nature. What I have seen is that does seem to create a resistance to that person. Perhaps an unconscious or maybe conscious bias, where either you and or the other participants can almost be aligned against that person. And I have seen that come up in various ways in mediations over time. The way that I try to deal with it is to bring the unconscious to the conscious. I point this out to my advocates. Make sure your client comes across well in the online setting. Do not let them be disadvantaged by showing up unprepared because you didn't prep them for this process. You are not doing your client a service if you do not prep them. And I actually have been doing a lot of trainings lately where I'm brought in by law firms, not to train the attorneys, to train their support staff on how to do pre-mediation work with the clients to get them ready for presenting themselves well in this online setting, explaining all of this to them. And it goes both to, I think, the setup that we talked about, but also how to properly express yourself online. There are some nuances to communicating online that I think are different on the online platform than are in person. Things like speaking clearly and into the microphone, things like I'm a hand talker, you might have noticed. I flap my hands around all the time. I count with them every time I do levels. These are my breakout rooms when I talk about breakout rooms. There are just certain things I do with my hands. And when I first started working online, I was a hand talker down here and it just looked like my head was shaking. And I was having some sort of an issue. So I've learned, over the years, if you're going to hand talk, I actually think it's expressive. Body language is another aspect of how we communicate. Make sure people understand that that they need to be on screen. So I've just adapted, and now I don't even think about it. I actually in person now find myself talking to people like this. They might all think if I ever got back into a courtroom, the judge would probably look at me like I was nuts. But that is important for people to know, because they don't think about it when they're doing it. Letting them know that their vocal inflection, that their facial expression is a great deal of their communication, and making sure that they understand, this is also a big one, that they cannot online interrupt other people. It's not a courtesy thing, although it is, but in the online setting, most of the time, the video conferencing platform will not catch audio from two people talking at the same time. And that can cause one of the parties thinking they were at least partially heard, not being heard at all. And that can go to then having to point out to that person that they just interrupted someone, which we might do in person as well, or that person not being heard at all. So one of the things I always make sure to let my participants know is that, again, they might be disadvantaging themselves, because I do want to hear what they have to say. So it's really important to wait until each person has finished what they're saying before they speak. And if they do interrupt, I always say, remember, that's why I didn't catch any of what you were saying. Zoom cuts out all but one audio at a time. So prepping those clients, prepping your advocates, prepping yourself is really key to this whole process. I think if you are a mediator, you are someone who is already well versed in picking up cues, in reading the external cues. Natalie mentioned the tapping finger, and she's right. I'm tapping my finger right now, and unless you hear it on my microphone, you're not going to know that I'm doing that. So there are other subtle clues of tension or impatience or whatever that tapping finger might mean for that person, or the jiggling foot or the other language. But I think as you become more conversant in being online, you're going to find that those clues also come out in the person's face and in the person's voice. We just need to be paying attention. So we have the skills already. Much of it just translates naturally. But the things that you were doing in your in-person mediations will also translate to your online practice. And so I encourage you all, and I tell everyone in my trainings to do this. We all think that because we're switching to a new medium, we have to do something completely different than what we did in person, that we've got to change. We don't. We have to adapt. We have to look at what we did in person and figure out how we can do it in an online platform. But it doesn't mean that all the nice things, like that gracious welcome or whatever that your aspects were, the joint opening session or whatever those things were, you can translate them online. It takes some thought ahead of time. I see Jean Lawler is on the call. She's someone who has beautifully transitioned to an online practice. And Jean, I think you would say you still conduct your mediations much. I mean, there have been adjustments, but do you feel it has a lot of that same feel and ability to communicate with your participants?
Surprisingly so, yes. In fact, I was just thinking, I've gotten so used to these now that it just feels normal, like you promised me it would. But in some ways, it's even better. So, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, because that's exactly what I experienced. Now, when I went online 5 years ago, much out of the same, desperation and need that we all feel right now because of COVID. Back then, I had moved to California and all my clients were in Connecticut. So if I wanted to make a living, I was going to have to figure out a way to talk to them. So I felt that same sort of, desperation or panic or whatever that might feel, just a true change was being thrust upon me as opposed to it being something that I chose. But it very quickly turned into one of the most positive things that ever happened to my practice. And any of you who know me now know I don't have an in-person office by choice and probably never ever will again. Because I think that in so many ways, my online practice has been more effective than my in-person practice. And that Jean just said, that it's something that just naturally seems to happen, that connection that you make with people. And in some ways it's easier. That mirrors my experience and what I hear from most of the people that report back to me. So I hope that these were helpful to you all. I will get the, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them. And while we're doing that, I'm going to look up that, that handout that I have for you all. I apologize, I didn't do that ahead of time, but I'll put the link to it in my chat so that you can all have it. And again, it's a Word document, so it's intended to be something that you can all, use as you like, not use if it's not helpful, but certainly adapt to your own practice. In fact, much like my online guidelines and ground rules, I make changes to them all the time or change them based upon the matter that is in front of me. Things change for every different mediation and different needs, different levels of experience for clients. So let me see, I think it's right here. But if anyone has questions, or I would love to just hear what everyone has found in their own practices on these particular issues.
Susan?
Yeah.
Janice has a quick question. You were talking about how interrupting doesn't work in these online audio formats. And her question is, how then do you handle objections during an arbitration if interrupting doesn't work for us?
So there are different things that I have heard of arbitrators doing, and judges, in fact, in Zoom trials and virtual trials. In fact, we're doing a webinar on this for the ABA on Thursday. So some will have color cards that they ask everyone to have ready, a green card, a red card, or something that will visually show quickly that there is an objection and make sure that everyone understands that the minute the red card goes up, silence should fall. So using that visual, because there is that problem of the fact that even if you jump up out of your seat, I object, and slam down, Zoom often will not catch it. So it should be something visual. Using the chat function is something that I've heard other people doing. The problem with that is not everyone will notice when a new chat comes in. And it may be something that it doesn't have that immediacy that we need when there's an objection. So the one that I've heard that's the most effective, and I have to say I don't do arbitrations myself, but is the red card, and literally having a big red like this where practically the whole screen. I will tell you, I have been talking with both Legaler and Modron, which are two of the online platforms for dispute resolution, and we have talked to them about adding that functionality so that it makes them more appealing for adjudications online. So that is one of the things that they're looking into adding. And I'm still sorry, somebody I saw just asked, they didn't see the link. You haven't seen it because I haven't found the handout yet. I apologize, I have it. I just have to get into my documents to find it, but I can answer questions as well if anyone has some questions.
Good morning.
Hi.
I noticed in my practice that the people, the non-lawyers that are participating from their own homes seem to feel more comfortable because they're in a familiar surrounding as opposed to being in a lawyer's office or the other lawyer's office, which would be even worse, or in a mediator's office. You know, strange surroundings. When they feel a little bit more comfortable, they can use their own bathroom and get their own coffee, which is probably better than the coffee that I make. So what's the experience of other people and you, Susan, as well? I'll shut up and listen.
I am so happy you said that. I should have had it in the presentation. That is, to me, one of the greatest benefits of online mediation, virtual mediation. I think that I do divorce mediation, high level of emotion the entire way through, from the first minute to the last minute. And that is something that has really made the process online actually more tolerable for people, and move more quickly for people because they are more comfortable. I would say more than 50% of the participants in the divorce mediations I do, one of them or both of them are sitting on a couch with a dog. They are in a much more comfortable setting for them, not in some stranger's conference room. They're already nervous, probably dressed up, or doing the tapping pen. And they're more able to tolerate high emotion in the content of their conversations as well. And Dr. Deborah actually pointed out that that is a biological reality. When you are in the same room, we have a different or a higher level of the stress hormone output when emotions start to get higher. The fact that people have remoteness in space, but there's still high emotion, yes, they're going to still have some level of high, stress hormone, but it is much decreased. And that, she said, is a scientific fact. So I have actually seen people that, in my experience of doing these divorce mediations for so long, I have seen people go along in a long period, go through a difficult emotional discussion, and be able to tolerate it for longer because they are online. So it's been helpful. That's another way, as Jean said, I think it's been helpful online. And Dr. Deborah is Dr. Deborah Dupree. She's a psychologist and mediator and trainer in San Diego, who was just a guest on my podcast talking on this very subject. So that's why I was referencing her. And I did find the handout. I'm going to get the link now. If I can just find it again. Darn it. I don't know what's going wrong with all of my my technology. You would think, being a tech person, I would have all these wonderful things, but it's not happening for me today. Here, copy link. Copy link. We're just going to spell it out as I'm doing it, folks. Sorry, because this is not happening. And here in the chat, I'm going to put a link to the Dropbox. And this is the document to everyone. Send. It's there. I hope it helps you out. It's a handout I give to clients and attorneys to give to their clients, outlining hopefully what will be helpful to get people prepared ahead of time. Has anybody else found that they think that people can tolerate those difficult conversations online a little bit better than in person? I saw somebody had a thumbs up there for a bit. I really think that's been a significant factor. I've told people when I did in-person mediations, divorce mediations are usually sequential meetings. We go for about 2 hours until their heads are ready to explode, and then we come back and reconvene down the road. And it used to take about 5 or 7 sessions to get through the entire divorce. And since I've segued to an online practice, it's more like 3, 4, or 5. Depending. It just moves much more smoothly. The emotional content is much more under control, but still addressed. It's not like it disappears. It's definitely, trust me, they can fight through a screen just as easily as they did it across my conference room table. But that's another aspect. One of the things as professionals that we need to be cognizant of is that the experience of the participants is vitally important. We want them to have a positive experience through this. Not that it's going to be easy or fun, but we want them to come out of it saying that mediation helped me get to the resolution that I can live with. And we don't want them saying, but the fact that it was online was a big problem. I didn't like the online process. The feedback I get, I always elicit feedback from my clients after the mediations about how they felt, not only the mediation process itself, but how they felt about the online platform. And again, anecdotally, universally, except for the ones who have tech issues that they fail to address, most people just, they find it to be a very positive experience working online. And that's been another factor that led to my not having an in-person office anymore. Most of I think after COVID, I think we're in a time of change. And I think that whether we want to go back to in-person or not, people are going to be looking for the online ease of work from home or just doing things remotely. Traffic is not something I'm looking forward to getting back into.
Susan,
so Elliot has a great, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, there's a handful of questions in the chat. Roger wants to know, do you find that there's a problem with people going AWOL during a mediation? For example, going for a walk or shopping online or something like that, or is that really only a problem in shuttle mediation situations?
No, it's a problem in both. It's something I address in my guidelines and ground rules and in my my pre-mediation conferences with people, as well as in my opening statement if I'm doing, you know, attorney assisted. When I'm working just with two pro se's in a marital mediation, I don't find it as much of a problem. They're pretty engaged and we're doing it for a short enough period of time that they can stay engaged. But one, when people are online or on a device, I find people answering their emails or checking their social media or texting people all the time. And I think that's because we have a level of desensitization these days where everybody is on one of these while they're doing everything else in their life. How many of you have gone to a committee meeting or a work meeting lately and half the people, all you see for the whole meeting is the top of their head because they're looking down at, you know, their phone or doing something else. So it's definitely something that I've noted in all of my online mediations. I ask people to have the courtesy and respect for the process to be engaged when they're needed to be engaged. Now that, to what you just said, Natalie, if you're doing shuttle diplomacy and they're in a breakout room and you're not there, and they don't need to be talking to their client, or the client wants to read a book, that's actually a benefit of online mediation. Attorneys love that aspect, that they can multitask. But I sort of make a bargain with them ahead of time and say, you know, line up that extra work, have it ready to go, but we need everyone engaged during the time frame. And I've called people out, you know, Bill, do you have something that you need to pay attention to right now? Because if it would be helpful to take a break, we can do that. Usually the head will pop back up from the phone at that point, but you do need to have people engaged. There is that. The other thing I do, just as a little tip, I take breaks more often online. I find that, you know, the fatigue of staring at the screen and being constantly on is wearing for us all, for us included. Somebody told me that when they're making their breakout rooms, they make one for themselves so they can go hide in there when they need a break from the process. They call it the, you know, their Zen room or the meditation room or something like that. But so I do take more breaks in the online realm, just giving the people the chance to go and deal with what they feel they need to deal with.
And then another question in our chat is, someone is asking, do you recommend a specific kind of camera or a specific kind of lighting, or do you have preferred brands or marks?
You know, I wouldn't say I have preferred brands. I have a few tips. So I use a separate, here, let me switch to my laptop camera. So you notice the color change there. I just did that. My laptop camera is kind of muted. See how I turned green a little bit? So I have one of the HD, you know, little separate cameras that you, a plug-in on my computer. I actually like it. One, it has a better picture, but I also like it because I can set it up on a box behind my screen. So it's actually optimally placed directly behind my computer screen and sort of eye level with me, which it helps with that eye contact with people. So I do like having just, and it also means I can be moving my computer. Well, I'm using my computer. So now if I'm using my computer around, it's moving my thumbnail around. If I am using the separate camera, which I switched back to it, my color's better. I'm not green anymore. Then I can move my computer around, and because the camera is stationary, it doesn't move. So I like using that. I do also like having the separate microphone. I have one that's relatively inexpensive. That was my first podcast one. This one's by Audio Technica. It was about $70 on Amazon, but I love it, and I use it when I travel. This is the one that I take with me because it's this thing's huge. But it comes with a little stand. You can set it up right in front of you. It's a USB plug-in, and I can move it around to get it in and out of the way. So that one was an Amazon purchase for me. And then the lighting, it really can be any lighting, but it's really where it's set up that's most important. You don't want a bright light behind you and nothing in front of you. You can have a bright light behind you, although it may not be the most flattering, but you do want to have lights over to each side of your computer screen that are shedding light towards your face. I have these that I got on Amazon as well. I think they were under $50. I can't remember. They're very bright, so I'm not going to turn it your way. They're LED photo video lights. I got them because I tape videos all the time, but they turned out to be great for my mediations as well. And I just have one on each side of my screen. They're actually not even pointing at me. They're blinding. They're pointing out, but they throw enough light on my face that there's that light on your face. But you can use desk lamps. You can use, actually, table lamps are great because they have a shade on them, so it's a diffuse light. There are also a lot of people I know are getting the ring lights that are on stands as well. I have one, this one lets you put your phone in this little clip here. So if you're filming videos and stuff like that, I don't find that one throws enough light. So I like those little freestanding ones. But really just get it, you don't have to spend a ton of money. As I said, that camera was about $50. This was about $70, and those lights were under $50. And, as a professional expense, especially since my online program overhead is under $100 a month and I don't have rent anymore, it felt like a good thing to spend some money on.
And then we've got a question from Michael. He's asking, could you please cover again for us body language? How do you overcome the difference in an online mediation real fast before we come to a conclusion?
Sure. So definitely there are going to be some aspects of body language that you're just not going to pick up. Right? You're not going to see the shaking foot. You may not catch, the tapping finger. That is a limitation of an online mediation, is that for the most part, everyone is only visible from the shoulders up. But what I would say to that is those are not the largest indicators of communication. It's back to the 55% of expression, and you have the best window possible, as long as people have a good camera and have a good setup and good light, you have the best window possible into people's facial expression. You've experienced this, and the rest of you have done the online mediations. I find that you become very attuned to the emotional content for people in things like how they're holding their lips, or the expression or the expressionless. Sometimes people go blank, and you can read a lot from that. But you can also ask the questions. you know, this seems to be making you tense, Bob, or I'm feeling some tension, or I'm guessing there's some tension around this. Am I right? Is this something that's of importance to you, or is causing you stress? Sometimes it will take some more questions, but I don't think that we should presume that you are losing all the communication because you don't see a tapping foot or a tapping finger. Much more is going to be revealed to you here and in the inflection in their voice. One thing that Jeff and I spoke about yesterday when we were talking, and I think is a critical factor for us all, he's doing it right now. He's got on his little Madonna headset, right? He's got on his ear phones. Here's what I wear when I do a mediation. Mine are even bigger than his. I go with the I'm Princess Leia look and have the big, you know, cones or poofs over my ears. It is so important to be able to hear the inflection in their tone and what they're saying, that I wear these for every mediation, and I recommend that they do the same, so that it doesn't matter, you know, if there's any noise in your background, if there's any noise in their background, it can be very hard to catch the nuances. And so these are a critical part of making sure that you can hear them well, and that they should have something as well. I personally like these because they don't die on me if I'm doing a longer mediation. My little earbuds are uncomfortable for the longer mediations, and they die halfway through. So these were a whopping, I think, $20 when I went to the airport once and forgot my earbuds. So I'm sure they're even cheaper than that, since they overcharge you for everything at the airport. But they're just Sony's, but they work great, and I do highly recommend having them. It's a lot of what we can pull out is to really hone in on how people are saying things and how they look when they're saying it, and it's this. But you can see, like, I just see Kimberly picked up her dog and put her dog in her lap. I do the same thing. Or Kitty. Hi, Kitty. I have my dog laying here. But I'll tell you, you know, as I said, many of my participants are sitting on their couch when they're with their dog or their cat when they're going through this. And I've noticed, you know, people will pick up their pet and hug their pet or start petting their pet like this when they get upset. And that actually speaks much more loudly to me than what they might have done in my office. If they're going to their comfort animal for comfort in that moment, it tells me that it's something I need to pay attention to. I actually saw a colleague's letter that they send out to clients ahead of time, and it said, please remove your pets from your mediation space. And I like sent them an email. I'm like, no, let them have their comfort animal if they're going through a stressful time, but two, how they interact with their pet or the other person. I have divorced couples that are sometimes sitting together, and I can tell quite a bit from their body language, whether they're leaning into the same screen, which is always a little awkward, or if I have one couple that has computers set up at each end of an office, and so when I'm looking at her, I see the back of his head on the other side of the room, and then when I look at him, I see the back of her head. But I can tell a lot from when they turn to each other and say, well, yeah, we've talked about this, Susan, and that's what there's a lot that you will continue to be able to pull from people's body language, despite being online.
Okay, excellent. And then I've got a question here. Do you send client prep handout and guidelines or ground rules to the clients before the pre-mediation meeting so that they have an opportunity to use that forum for any questions?
Absolutely. I send them to them multiple times. I'm a repeat offender. I don't think you can tell people and educate them enough. And I will tell you, the worst offenders are the lawyers, because they don't read any of the stuff you send them. So I definitely have a little chit chat with them in the pre-conference call or the pre-conference video call about what's in those and how important it is that they let their clients know what's in there. And I think you'll find very impactful for dealing with the advocates is warning them that not telling their clients may put their clients at a disadvantage. That is something that will get people's attention, and it's very true. That unconscious bias or conscious bias toward people who are ill prepared for an online proceeding and therefore they gum it up is something that people feel whether they realize they're feeling it or not. And so when somebody is gumming up the works because they can't figure out the tech, or they didn't get set up well, or they just opened up the ancient laptop that their kids used to use to play games on and found out it doesn't have a camera or microphone because they didn't do any prep to get ready, had all those happen, then, you know, those are, that can be problematic for their client in the mediation process.
Right. Okay, and last question before we say thank you so much for your really valuable program today is from Lori. Lori wants to know, when you take a break, do you put clients back in a breakout room?
Yes. I hardly, if I'm doing a caucus style mediation, I don't take them out of there very often. Once I've moved everyone into their breakout rooms, I go to the breakout rooms to meet with them, but I don't bring them out of the breakout rooms to talk to me. And I don't, you know, just as we would not put people and leave them in our conference room together and leave them often. I wouldn't do that in the main meeting. You can also, if people want the opportunity to go and, you know, eat lunch or do something like that, you can also put everyone back in the waiting room. But that's the cone of silence. There's much less ability for them to communicate. So I will usually just leave everyone in their breakout rooms. I use my phone to communicate with people in the breakout rooms. It's another reason why I like Modron, perhaps maybe a little bit better than Zoom, and maybe switching to that for my main platform soon, because it has much easier communication with the conference rooms. They call them spaces, no, space calls, yeah, spaces. But, you know, I always want people to be somewhere where they can be comfortable and have that talk.
Excellent.
Well, Susan, this was just terrific. We're almost out of time. I want to ask you if you have any last final wrapping up comments for us. I want to remind everyone that this is part of the Will Work for Food project that Natalie so beautifully organized a couple of months ago, and I'm so happy to be a part of it. I want to thank everybody for being here. If you like what you saw and you're able to do so, please make a contribution to a food bank in your area. And if you're one of the people right now who has food insecurity and needs the assistance of the food bank, we're very happy to be able to support the food banks so that you can get the assistance that you need right now at what is a very difficult time. Susan, this is just terrific. We call this the New Possibilities Hour. And what is a greater new possibility for all of us than to follow in the footsteps you pioneered 5 years ago in becoming effective online mediators? Final words, Susan, and final words, Natalie, please.
Yeah, I thank you all, you know, for coming here and for continually reaching out to educate yourselves as you make these changes in your process. I know there's a lot of questions maybe we didn't get to. Please feel free to use me as a resource. You can reach out to me and send me your questions by email to susan@learntomediateonline.com. That's my website. I also have a lot of free resources on there. I do videos and things to help you, how to use breakout rooms, how to use your iPad in a mediation. And then I have the podcast as well, which I do solely for the purpose of trying to get as much information out there. I'm lucky enough to be in a group of where I'm getting a lot of information quickly on the rapid changes that are coming in ODR right now, and I want you all to know about them. So feel free to subscribe to the podcast, listen there. It's all on the website, learntomediateonline.com. So thank you all.
Great, thank you. Natalie?
I just want to wrap up by saying, Susan, what a great pleasure it was to have you join us today. We really, really appreciate the help that you've provided, and I encourage everyone to log on to Susan's websites, look at the resources, read the articles, listen to the podcast, view the videos. She is a seemingly bottomless well of information. Take great advantage of her generous offer.
Great. Susan, thank you. Natalie, thank you. Everybody who's here, thank you very much for participating. We'll see you on Thursday when our guest is Misha Starr-Liberty, the president of the Consumer Attorneys of California, talking about how COVID-19 has changed the litigation environment and how we have to adapt to that as mediators. See you Thursday, everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Please donate.
Thank you. Thank you.